I spent years building my dream cabin in the woods, every nail, every board, laid with my own hands. But the first night I moved in, flashing lights woke me up. Cops surrounded my home. Why? Because a fake HOA claimed I was trespassing on my own land. They wanted to steal everything I built, but they messed with the wrong man. I still remember the first time I laid eyes on the land. It was a crisp autumn morning nearly a decade ago, and I was on a solo road trip to escape the noise of the city. I wasn't looking for anything, certainly not property. But when I stumbled across that winding gravel road that led into the trees, something told me to follow it. And there it was. 30 acres of raw, untouched forest, framed by distant mountain ridges and a private lake that shimmered like polished glass under the morning sun. No for sale signs. No fences. Just peace. I later found out through a friend at the county clerk's office that the land had gone unnoticed in a tax lien sale. Dirt cheap, off-grid, untamed, and absolutely perfect. At the time, I was still working full-time as a defense contractor, but I had just come back from my final deployment overseas. After 20 years of military service and watching too many good men never return home, I was desperate for a slice of silence. Something that was mine. Not rented. Not borrowed. Mine. So I bought it. Every last acre. I paid cash. And when the deed was in my name, I drove back out there with a tent, a thermos of black coffee, and the sound of the wind in the trees. No electricity. No plumbing. Just dirt, pine, and purpose. I spent 5 years building my cabin. Not all at once. Just weekends, holidays, and whatever spare time I could squeeze between contracts. I didn't hire anyone. Didn't want to. I was a carpenter's son, and I knew my way around a hammer. Besides, this wasn't just about building a house. It was about earning it. I hauled and reclaimed lumber, salvaged bricks, and even milled a few fallen trees myself, with a portable sawmill. Every plank in that cabin has a story. Every nail is a scar from my hands. I slept in the back of my pickup truck most nights, wrapped in an old military blanket, waking up with the sunrise and the cold breath of the forest around me. Over the years, I added what I could. A small solar array, a propane stove, a rainwater filtration system. I learned to live without a phone signal. I caught trout from the lake and smoked it over a fire pit I'd built out of river stones. I kept a journal. I started carving again, something I hadn't done since I was a boy. The place didn't just heal me. It saved me. I never planned to live there full time. Not at first. But after I hit my mid-50s, the city started closing in on me. Every corner of the old neighborhood was being torn down and replaced with high-rise condos or chain stores. People stopped saying hello. The air felt thinner, colder. I'd see my neighbors through tinted windows, never on the porch. One day, a new landlord bought the house next door and chopped down 3-century-old trees to make room for a parking lot. That was the last straw. I packed up, sold the city house, said goodbye to rush hour traffic, bad coffee, and forced small talk. I was finally ready to move into my cabin. Full-time. Permanently. It felt right. I had saved up enough to retire comfortably and live off-grid. I knew the land like the back of my hand. Every hill, every deer trail, every whisper of wind in the pines. This wasn't just my retreat anymore. It was home. So when I drove up that gravel road with my old U-Haul trailer packed full of books, tools, and the last few boxes from my life in the city, I felt lighter than I had in years. I parked in the clearing, stepped out into the late afternoon sun, and just stood there, breathing, smiling, listening. I'd made it. I was home. That's when I noticed it. A piece of paper, white, taped to the old cedar tree near my driveway. I frowned, walked over, and peeled it off. The paper was crinkled from the wind, but the print was sharp and bold. Notice of violation. Unauthorized residential occupancy. By order of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. I stared at it for a long minute. Confused. Disoriented. My first thought was that it was some kind of prank. I didn't live in a subdivision. There were no neighbors for miles. This land wasn't zoned for a neighborhood, let alone an HOA. I'd done my research. Triple-checked everything before I bought it. And yet, here it was. An official-looking letter claiming I was violating something called a new HOA compliance mandate. I scanned the bottom. There was a phone number listed for an HOA compliance officer, and in faded ink near the top corner, the words Silver Pines Community Association had been stamped like it meant something. Silver Pines? I'd never heard of that name in my life. There weren't even silver pines on this property, mostly spruce, oak, and fir. What kind of HOA operated in the middle of nowhere? The paper felt like it weighed 10 pounds. I folded it slowly, tucking it into my back pocket, and looked back at my cabin. The sun was starting to set behind the trees, casting golden light through the window panes I had installed with my own hands. Smoke rose from the chimney I had mortared brick by brick. That was my house, my land. I shook my head, forcing down the uneasy feeling in my stomach. Maybe it was a mistake, a mix-up. Someone posted this on the wrong property. That had to be it. I decided not to panic. Not tonight. I unloaded the last of the boxes into the cabin, lit the wood stove, and made a hot cup of coffee. Then I sat on the front porch, wrapped in a flannel blanket, and watched the stars come out. More stars than I'd seen in years. It was supposed to be my first peaceful night in the place I had built with my bare hands. I didn't know it then, but it would be anything but peaceful. The next morning, I woke up early to the sound of wind rustling through the trees and the steady drip of rainwater off the cabin's tin roof. For a moment, everything felt normal, peaceful, but the folded paper still sitting on my kitchen counter pulled me out of that illusion. The HOA notice hadn't been a dream. I stared at it again, hoping it might read differently in daylight. It didn't. Same bold lettering, same smug tone, and the same unsettling phrase, unauthorized residential occupancy. I poured myself a black cup of coffee, sat at the wooden table I had built by hand, and dialed the number listed on the bottom of the notice. After 2 rings, a woman answered. Her voice was clipped and professional, but oozed with artificial sweetness. Silver Pines Community Association. This is Karen speaking. The irony wasn't lost on me. Of course her name was Karen. I cleared my throat. Hi, yes. My name is Thomas Blake. I received some sort of violation notice on my cabin. I believe there's been a mistake. There was a pause, then the tapping of keys. Address. I gave it to her, even though I knew there wasn't a formal one. Just a parcel number and a GPS tag. More clicking. Then she sighed like I was already wasting her time. You're located within the extended jurisdiction of the Silver Pines Community Association, effective as of January this year. I blinked. Jurisdiction? There was no HOA here when I bought this land, and I've lived here off and on for years. This property isn't part of any community. I own it outright. She didn't hesitate. We've recently expanded to preserve the natural beauty of the area and enforce visual standards across the extended development boundary. Your structure has not been approved for full-time residency. You'll need to submit an application for review. Her tone was sharp now, like I was just another complaint in her daily routine. I gripped the edge of the table. You're telling me I can't live in the cabin I built with my own hands? On land I legally purchased almost 10 years ago. Karen responded like she was reading from a script. Until your structure passes occupancy certification through our compliance board, you are considered in violation. Continued residence may lead to civil penalties. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not going to happen. You have no right to make demands on private property you don't own or govern. She didn't budge. Mr. Blake, we've informed the county. If you do not comply, law enforcement may be involved to enforce code restrictions. This is your formal warning. Then click. The line went dead. I sat in silence, the dial tone humming in my ear like a war drum. It didn't make sense. I checked the zoning laws when I bought this place. This land was rural, unincorporated, and exempt from neighborhood codes. There had never been mention of any community association, let alone one with the power to dictate occupancy. My deed didn't list any HOA covenants. No bylaws. No architectural committees. Nothing. And yet, here I was, being told by a woman I'd never met that I needed permission to live in my own cabin. I stepped outside, pacing the dirt path that led from my porch to the lake. My boots kicked up damp leaves as I thought back to the past few months. Could they have formed an HOA recently and annexed surrounding land without informing me? Was that even legal? Something smelled off. Very off. I decided to head into the nearest town, a 45-minute drive, to speak with someone at the county clerk's office. Maybe there was some paperwork filed, some recent change in zoning. I needed answers. At the courthouse, the clerk, a friendly woman named Denise, pulled up the most recent records tied to my parcel. After scanning for a few minutes, she looked up, puzzled. "There's no HOA tied to your land," she said. "No recent changes. You're still listed as rural private property. No municipal annexation. Nothing." I showed her the violation notice. Her eyes narrowed. "I've heard of them, Silver Pines. They filed paperwork to form a voluntary HOA 6 months ago, but they only had 3 signatures from nearby landowners, and it was supposed to apply to a single subdivision development 3 miles north of your cabin. You're nowhere near it." I felt my stomach twist. "So how are they claiming I'm under their control?" She frowned. "They might be trying to expand, but without your consent or a change in zoning, they have no authority over you. They'd need a unanimous vote and a change in deed restrictions for that. This sounds fishy." Fishy didn't even begin to describe it. By the time I drove back to the cabin, the sun was already dipping behind the treetops. I pulled up the driveway and froze. Another notice, this time, stapled directly to my front door. In bright red print across the top, it read, "Final warning, cease occupation immediately. Pending HOA review. Noncompliance will result in escalation." My blood boiled. I yanked it off the door and stormed inside. My cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a target. Someone was watching. Someone was trying to intimidate me. I didn't know how far they were willing to go, but I was about to find out. I spent that night uneasy, my rifle resting against the wall, a flashlight under my pillow. Every sound outside, every rustling leaf, every snapping twig made me sit up. Was it an animal? Or one of them? The silence that had once brought me peace now felt sharp-edged and full of threat. These people didn't care about preserving nature. They wanted control, and I wasn't about to give it to them. Not after all I'd built. Not after all I'd been through. But I had no idea that their next move wouldn't be a letter or a phone call. It would be the police, and they were coming that very night. It was just past 2 a.m. when I was jolted awake by a noise I hadn't heard in years, blaring engine hum, gravel crunching under fast-moving tires, and blinding flashes of white and blue light cutting through the windows like lightning. For a second, I thought I was back overseas. My instincts kicked in before my brain caught up. I was out of bed, grabbing the rifle I kept beside the door, heart pounding, mind racing. I peeked through the curtains and felt my chest tighten. 3 sheriff's vehicles were pulled up along my driveway in a haphazard formation, their spotlights pointed directly at my front porch. Figures moved quickly outside, voices barking through radios, and just as I opened the door to step out and announce myself, a booming voice through a megaphone cut through the forest air. "This is the county sheriff's department. Step out of the house with your hands in plain view." My blood ran cold. I hadn't broken a single law. I hadn't even left my property. Still, I set the rifle down carefully, raised both hands above my head, and stepped barefoot onto the porch into the harsh glare of their lights. The cold night air slapped against my skin, but the adrenaline kept me warm. "My name is Thomas Blake," I shouted, voice steady. "This is my property. What's the problem?" 2 officers moved forward cautiously, hands on their holsters, scanning every shadow around me. Another stood behind a cruiser door, aiming a flashlight and possibly something more. The lead deputy, a tall, grizzled man with a buzz cut and a face that looked like it had seen too much, stepped forward. "We received a report of a squatter trespassing in an unoccupied cabin owned by the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. The report said you broke in last night." I stared at him, stunned. "That's a lie," I said flatly. "I own this land. I built this cabin with my own hands. There's no HOA here. This property is in my name. I've got the deed inside." He held up a hand, stopping me. "Sir, for your safety and ours, stay right there. If you can provide identification and proof of ownership, We can sort this out." I nodded slowly. Wallet's in the cabin. Front pocket of my jeans. I'll retrieve it carefully. After tense silence and a nod from the deputy, I turned, walked back inside under their watchful eyes, and grabbed my wallet and a folder of documents I kept in a drawer just in case. When I returned, I handed it all to the deputy. He looked through my driver's license, then examined the deed, my tax records, and the dated photographs of the construction process. All proof this wasn't some abandoned shack I wandered into. "This is legit," he muttered, eyebrows furrowed. He turned to one of the younger deputies and motioned for him to check the parcel number against county records. As they stepped away, I looked at the rest of the officers. None of them looked convinced I was a criminal, but the tension still hung thick in the air like fog. 15 minutes later, the younger deputy returned with a clipboard and a shrug. "Confirmed. Property's been under Blake's name for over 9 years. No HOA covenants on file. No outstanding issues." The lead deputy turned back to me and let out a breath. "Mr. Blake, I apologize. We were told this was part of an HOA-controlled community, and that a break-in had occurred. Seems like that report wasn't accurate." I crossed my arms. "Wasn't accurate? This is harassment. A woman named Karen Mathers from Silver Pines has been trying to scare me off my own land. She left 2 fake notices. Now she's calling the cops in the middle of the night and telling them I'm a squatter." The deputy's jaw tightened. "I've heard that name before. She's been filing complaints all over the place lately. Mostly nuisance stuff, noise, construction, code violations. But this is the first time she's escalated to criminal claims." I narrowed my eyes. "So what happens now?" He sighed. "Legally, you're in the clear. But if she continues filing false reports, we'll need to escalate it to the county prosecutor. Unfortunately, we're required to respond to every call we receive. If she makes another claim, and it appears credible on paper, we may be forced to act again, unless this gets shut down at the legal level." That hit me like a punch. I could be dragged out of my own home again because some bitter HOA rep was playing games? What about trespassing laws? I asked. "She has no right to step on my property, post notices, or interfere with my life." He nodded. "I suggest setting up cameras, documenting every interaction, and speaking to a lawyer first thing in the morning. If she sets foot here again, call us immediately. We'll file a report and back you up." I gave a tight nod, fury bubbling under my calm surface. They wrapped up shortly after, apologizing again and pulling out slowly, their headlights vanishing into the dark forest like ghosts retreating from daylight. When they were gone, I stood on the porch for a long time, the chill starting to creep into my bones now that the adrenaline was fading. The cabin behind me, once a sacred retreat I had spent years building, now felt vulnerable, exposed to the petty, cruel games of a woman who didn't understand the meaning of boundaries or truth. I walked back inside, locked the door, and stared at the rifle leaning against the wall. I hadn't needed it tonight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. This was no longer just a dispute over paper. This was a fight to defend my peace, my work, and my home. Karen Mathers had sent the police to threaten me. What would she try next? As I settled into bed, wide awake despite the late hour, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't be intimidated. Not by fake rules. Not by HOA bullies. And sure as hell not by someone who thought she could rewrite the truth with paperwork and threats. If she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. I woke up the morning after the police raid with a dull ache in my chest, not from fear, but from something deeper. Betrayal, anger, exhaustion. I had built my cabin as a place of peace, a shelter from the madness of the world, and yet now, it felt like I was under siege, not from criminals or nature, but from a paper-pushing tyrant hiding behind a desk somewhere in a suburban office, calling herself a compliance officer. Karen Mathers. The name burned into my memory like a brand. I'd had enough of her games. The notices, the lies, the false police report. It was time to fight back, not with fists or rifles, but with facts and law. I spent that entire morning gathering every document I had. Land deed, tax records, zoning maps, building permits. I even printed out photographs of myself constructing the cabin. stretching back 5 years, each one stamped with a digital date. Then I called up the best real estate attorney in the county, an older man named Robert Hastings. He'd been handling land disputes for over 30 years and didn't suffer nonsense. After hearing a brief rundown over the phone, he agreed to meet me the same day. "This smells like a predatory land grab," he said, his voice gravelly and blunt. "Bring everything you've got. Let's dig into this." I drove straight to his office in the next town over, a small brick building tucked between an insurance agency and a bakery. Hastings had silver hair slicked back and a pair of wireframe glasses that rested halfway down his nose. As I laid everything out on the long oak table in his conference room, he read through it with growing interest and growing concern. "This HOA, Silver Pines, you said? They've filed legal paperwork with the state, but they've overstepped their jurisdiction," he muttered. "See this?" He pointed to a map he had pulled from the state's registry. "They only have authority over a 5-lot subdivision up north. Your land is more than 2 miles outside their declared boundary. They're trying to create the illusion of power by acting first and letting people fight back later." My stomach sank. "So they're bluffing? Hoping folks won't challenge them?" He nodded. "Exactly. It's a land scam dressed in HOA clothing. They're targeting isolated property owners, mostly retirees, veterans, off-grid folks. People they assume won't lawyer up." He leaned back in his chair. "But you did." We spent the next several hours filing complaints, first with the County Planning Commission, then with the State Attorney General's office. Hastings wrote a cease and desist letter addressed directly to Karen Mathers and the so-called Silver Pines Community Association, demanding that they remove all notices, cease communication, and retract all claims of jurisdiction. But the real bombshell came when Hastings dug deeper into Karen's background. Turns out, she wasn't just some power-hungry HOA rep. She was a real estate developer. And not just any developer. She had recently acquired a large tract of forest land adjacent to several private lots and was quietly pushing to rezone the area into a luxury eco-resort. That's when the puzzle pieces snapped together. Karen didn't care about visual harmony or environmental preservation. She was trying to pressure people off their land so she could scoop it up, consolidate it, and flip it to investors. I wasn't the first person she had tried to bully. Hastings found records of 2 elderly landowners who had sold their properties after being harassed with legal notices and threats. One of them, a widow in her 70s, had called the sheriff 3 times before she gave up and moved in with her daughter. I felt a cold wave of fury sweep through me. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had made a career out of intimidating people who couldn't fight back. I decided to go public. Hastings helped me prepare a full report, complete with maps, dates, and legal documentation. I contacted a local news outlet, and within 48 hours, a reporter and cameraman drove out to interview me. I took them on a walk through my land, showed them the notices, the camera footage from the night of the police raid, and the folder of documents proving my ownership. The story aired that weekend. Veteran harassed by fake HOA. Land scam exposed. It went viral locally. Comments poured in from people who had faced similar situations or feared they might be next. The exposure worked faster than I imagined. The next week, Karen Mathers herself came back to my property, this time in broad daylight, dressed in a cream blazer and holding a manila folder like it was a shield. I was chopping firewood near the shed when she stepped out of her car and approached me with that same fake smile I remembered from our phone call. "Mr. Blake," she said, as if we were old friends. "I came to apologize for the misunderstanding. Things may have gotten a bit overcomplicated." I didn't stop chopping. I didn't even look up. "Overcomplicated?" I said. "You sent the police to my door in the middle of the night, lied about owning my land, and tried to scare me into selling. That's not complicated. That's criminal." She hesitated, then tried again. "Look, we may have overstepped, but I can make this right. I'm prepared to offer you a generous sum for your land, way above market value." That's when I stopped and looked her straight in the eyes. "You think I built this cabin for money? You think I'd let you take it from me after everything I've poured into this place?" I took a step closer. "You don't own this. You don't control this. and you're going to pay for every threat you've made to me and others like me." She opened her mouth to say something else, but I raised a hand. "Leave. You're trespassing. And next time, I won't be the one answering the door. My lawyer will." She left in a hurry. The cream-colored blazer didn't look so clean under the harsh light of the truth. Later that evening, I stood on my porch watching the sun dip behind the lake, the golden light casting long shadows across the water. I knew the battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time in days, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while: control. Karen had tried to silence me with paperwork and lies. She thought she could scare me into giving up my land. Instead, she'd exposed her entire scam. I was no longer just a target. I was the one shining the light, and she had nowhere left to hide. The morning after Karen Mathers left my property in a flurry of fake smiles and thinly veiled threats, the air around my cabin felt different. Not just calmer, but heavier, like the last breath before a storm finally breaks. I knew she wasn't finished, not someone like her. People like Karen don't back down because they're wrong. They only retreat when they're exposed. But I also knew she was rattled. Her empire of silence and intimidation had been cracked wide open. The local news piece had made waves, and not just with the townsfolk. Within days, my lawyer, Hastings, called to inform me that the state attorney general's office had formally opened an investigation into Silver Pines Community Association for fraud, unlawful jurisdiction claims, and harassment of private property owners. Turns out Karen's little scheme had left behind a lot more than just angry landowners. It had left a paper trail, one that was now being used against her. I watched it all unfold from the comfort of my cabin, not on a screen, but through visits from investigators, copies of court filings, and the now regular drive-bys of sheriff cruisers, not to intimidate me, but to protect me. The sheriff himself stopped by one afternoon in his personal truck. Deputy Daniels was with him, the same young man who had stood awkwardly in my yard the night of the raid. This time, he wasn't holding a flashlight. He was holding a thermos of coffee and a sincere apology. "We should have asked more questions that night," he said quietly. "We didn't know she was lying." I nodded, not out of bitterness, but understanding. "You were doing your job. Now I'm doing mine." The full truth unraveled fast. Karen had used her status as a developer and her legal knowledge to create a phantom HOA, one that existed more on paper than in reality. With just a few signatures from landowners, she manipulated into joining her cause. She filed for a nonprofit status, then expanded her imaginary boundaries to include dozens of private parcels she never had the right to control. She'd sent out hundreds of notices over the span of a few months, claiming authority, demanding compliance, and offering to purchase land under the guise of neighborhood beautification. Her tactic was simple: wear people down until they gave in. What she didn't expect was someone like me, stubborn, proud, and just old school enough to stand my ground instead of signing it away. The investigation found that she had coerced at least 6 landowners into selling under false pretenses. 2 of them were now elderly and living in assisted care, unable to fight for themselves. One was a disabled veteran who had been issued fake fines until he gave up and moved. When I heard that, something inside me snapped, not out of rage, but a deep, cold resolve. I wasn't just going to defend my cabin anymore. I was going to make sure Karen Mathers could never do this to anyone again. With Hastings leading the charge, I filed a civil lawsuit against Karen and the Silver Pines HOA, demanding damages for harassment, emotional distress, trespassing, and defamation. Other victims joined in, and what began as a private battle became a class action lawsuit. Karen's house of cards collapsed even faster than she built it. Her developer partners distanced themselves. Her license came under review. Eventually, she was charged with filing fraudulent legal documents and attempting to unlawfully claim jurisdiction over land she didn't own. The judge issued a court order dissolving the HOA entirely, rendering all of its actions null and void. Notices, threats, and even their so-called bylaws were struck down like dust in the wind. Karen herself was ordered to pay restitution, and although she tried to squirm her way out with legal maneuvers and last-minute settlements, her reputation was toast. Word around town was she sold her property and fled the state, off to start fresh in another corner of the country, hopefully where folks weren't as stubborn as I was. As for me, I stayed. I didn't just stay. I reclaimed everything that had been tainted. I rebuilt my porch railing, added new solar panels, and installed motion sensor lights around the cabin. But more than that, I restored something deeper. My sense of belonging. My peace. I no longer looked over my shoulder or worried about what envelope might show up taped to a tree. I planted a garden next to the cabin. Started carving again, this time bigger pieces, more intricate. I even started teaching local kids woodwork on weekends, just for the joy of passing something real along. Hastings, now a good friend, urged me to write a book about what happened. I'm not a writer, but maybe someday I will. For now, I'm just living the life I fought for, one quiet sunrise at a time. Every morning, I sit on my porch with a mug of steaming coffee in hand, watching the mist roll off the lake, listening to the call of birds returning to their nests. The silence is no longer sharp with tension, it's soft, deep earned. The trees no longer feel like walls, but guardians. My cabin, once threatened by paper bullies and false authority, stands stronger than ever. And if you were to visit and ask me what I learned from it all, I'd tell you this. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you protect. People like Karen don't come with pitchforks or torches. They come with clipboards, legalese, and smug smiles, hoping you'll back down before they ever have to prove they're right. But if you stand tall, if you know the truth, arm yourself with facts, and hold your ground, people like that lose their power. I was just one man with a cabin in the woods, but I was enough to bring her empire down. And that's something no one can take away from me again. So, if you're watching this or reading this, and you're in a fight of your own, against a fake HOA, a corrupt board, or a bully with a title, know this. You're not alone. You have rights. And you don't have to leave your home just because someone tells you to. Stand firm. Speak up. And never, ever sell what you've built just to make someone else rich. This is Thomas Blake, and this story was brought to you by Faces of Racism. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you believe in standing up for your rights, even when it's hard.